Varus is able to use these two souls, meld them together. Like, if there's any Full Metal Alchemist fans out there,
Yeah.
you already know the joke I'm going to make here. Edward. And that's it. All right. We won't go deeper.
Oh, no.
It's still too soon.
Welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, episode 114. I'm your host, Ryan, here with your other host, Hetch.
Yes, and we have some spicy content coming up today, going down the rabbit hole of the Darkin, baby.
Yeah, we opened the gates, and it peered back, and now we're in the darkness. So we're still dealing with Shurima stuff, or Shurima adjacent,
Yes.
because of the origin of Darkins. At this point, you should be at an intermediate level of Darkin / Shuriman history knowledge with all the shit we've done.
And of course, like at this point, you should also be the same as us. We're only able to give you this content because we were smart enough to not touch the living weapon.
Yeah, do not touch the living weapon.
Do not touch the living weapon. But of course, you know, if you haven't got caught up, the best way to get caught up is to check out our housekeeping.
Yeah.
And because with that, like if you like this, you can listen to us everywhere. You can find us pretty much everywhere, and you can email us at podcastcore@gmail.com, and you can find the other places that we stream at podcastcore.com. And we would love for it if you follow us at all the platforms. It really helps us out, helps us with visibility, especially if you leave a like and comment. But of course, the easiest way is to tell a friend. And what should they tell their friends, Ryan?
Tell a friend to find the power inside you by listening to the Casuals of Runeterra podcast.
You know what? I'm kind of happy. This time it wasn't nearly as cringy as sometimes you assault me.
Yeah, context matters, so we'll get there. So what are we talking about this episode, guys? We're talking about Varus, and this episode is titled 3-Soul Monte. If you don't know what 3-card Monte is, too bad. We're moving on.
That's right. That's it. That's the last time you'll hear it, too.
It works so well because we're talking about the cards, which we start with this spell, and the spell is the Sudden Surge. So the Sudden Surge is the source of our cheese line this week, and what it does is a 4-cost burst spell that says once you have equipped, we've told you about equipment before in previous episodes, an ally this game, I cost 2 less. Grow an ally to 4/4 this round. So if you've played with Lulu, you know how grow works. And then also, you know what equipment does. And this is a burst speed spell. You got all this information. What we care about is the quote. And this one's simple, which is, there is so much power in us. And that sounds motivational until you understand who Varus is.
Yeah, it really does sound motivational. And then the deeper that we're going to get into this, you're going to find out that it's motivational if you have split personalities.
Yeah, if you have BPD, this is the episode for you.
Yeah. But I mean, otherwise, like other than the flavor text, like this is it's an interesting card. I do like the whole like Lulu gameplay stuff, but there just isn't an equipment style deck that really matches that yet. So maybe one day this will find a home. Maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah, and this takes us to another misdirection card, which is Blooming Cultist. So the cultist type cards we've mentioned in the past with other Darkins, and this applies to the mechanics of Varus as well. So these cards will be used, and we'll talk more about that when we get to his section. But for Blooming Cultist, you look at it, you're like, what the hell? This isn't a thing. But it's a flower that's being corrupted, and it's a 3-cost 3/2 with the text, once you've equipped an ally this game, grant me elusive. So this is a pretty solid card because elusive is great when you can put stuff on your creatures, and then it grants it for the duration of the game if it happens at all. So if you're playing an equipment deck, you're going to have this ability.
Yeah. And of course, like having the ability to be evasive with equipment is pretty strong. Like, because elusive decks already just kind of want to have the ability to end a game relatively quick. So if you can have an equipped creature getting through the radar, like that's good. Like that speeds up your win con, and that's really what you need. Because if the game stretches out too long, you're probably dead. Um,
Exactly. And
but
oh, go ahead.
why are we talking about the card?
Well, the quote on this one is what's giving us the scope of the impact of Darkins, which you probably understand by this point, but it says, quote, person, plant, animal, the darkened corruptive influence spares no one and nothing. And the reason I bring this up is because even in the stories, and you'll hear it as we talk about Varus, even the Vastaya are affected by what's going on with the Darkin, right? So it's not even just one realm that's being affected by their existence. It's far reaching, which makes sense because the reason they exist is the void, right? So
Yes.
that's just something to keep in mind, even though this card is hilarious that they made this occultist card. They're like, hey, look at this flower. Don't fuck with it because it's been corrupted, right?
It really is such a clowny idea, but the idea as far as like corruption really affecting all of life in Runeterra is something that we've talked about, even if you go further back than when we started doing our dive into the Darkin. Like if we go to our episodes where we cover the story of the first bow and the kunai,
Yeah.
where spoilers if you haven't listened to that episode, which if you haven't, go listen to it. Like that was a fun story for us to
Hmm.
cover. But we got to see in Ionia that with all of the death and despair, thanks to the Noxian invasion
Hmm.
and the turmoil within the Kinku order, that like the nature around them was twisting and basically coming to life and being murderous. So the Darkin aren't any different than that. Like they corrupt everything. It's not good. Like if nature's getting twisted, it's not, like we laugh at the card because it is kind of goofy if you just take it at surface value. But
Yeah.
since we know the stories, we know that no, I'm not gonna fuck with that flower. Like 100%.
So let's talk about the man or men themselves. Ooh.
That's right. All right. So we're diving into Varus. I've been super excited to talk about Varus because this is like one of my favorite characters to play, like in League of Legends. He has a really cool story, really cool character, and of course we're gonna go back a long time ago because Varus was a loyal paragon of honor, and he was a defender of the temples of Shurima. And if you're kind of like, recognizing this part as far as from like our Aatrox tale, where we talk about how Aatrox was, loyal to Shurima and loyal to his fellow soldiers, Varus isn't too different than that. The biggest difference at this point of the story is that he was known as a skilled archer. The other biggest difference is he was just a man. All right. Those are the two biggest things.
He
But
look like a man.
he he looking like a man.
Yeah. Once again, dating ourselves.
Yes, on the note of dating ourselves, Alex Borstein, I love you. Let me buy you dinner. But so so with Varus being a skilled archer, he had taken a vow to be a temple guard within the Shuriman Empire. We don't know what temple he guarded, and we don't know exactly where. Um, well, we kind of have an idea of where it was. It would have been in the eastern part of the empire because the temple that he was guarding was affected during the war with Acathia. Now, if you've listened to our Jax episode, especially like the story that we covered, we know that like the Acathians were able to get a win. Like they got a W before like the rebellion went into full swing. So this is likely at that point where, they're right on the heels of they got their victory and now they're trying to push the Shirimans out of their lands. And this is affecting the temple that Varus is guarding. Now, the way that it affects it isn't so much that the Acathians are invading the temple, but the Acathians are invading the homeland of the people that were recruited to guard this temple. So, for the vast majority of all the guardsmen, they all dip to go try to save their hometown, except for Varus. He decides to honor his vows that he has to the temple, which does work in Shuriman in the favor of the Shurimans because that temple is attacked. And in the story, it is said that he wailed and let out his anger and anguish with every arrow that he loosed. But he is able to successfully guard the temple, and the way that the Shirimans are able to like take that land back is they just kind of show up. There's no one there fighting, and then the Ascended walk into the temple to see Varus just meditating amongst the dead.
Yeah, I like to think that the expression where, he unleashes every arrow with anguish and pain is a reference to, a layer down where his sanity is being like he's essentially letting go of his sanity. While, the void's running loose, he's protecting from all these enemies. He's essentially pushing himself to the brink, right? Mentally and physically. And when they come and find him, I feel like him sitting there solemnly meditating is him essentially becoming an empty husk of what he was. He's given everything with every arrow because what happens next plays into that for me mentally or
Yes.
for metaphor wise.
No, I fully agree, not just for you, because it is stated that even the Ascended were taken aback when they met Varus's gaze because it was just so cold and empty. Like he has now just devoted himself solely to eradicating the enemies that have caused him all of this pain and anguish. And luckily, because of for I guess luckily for Varus in this sense, like
Mhm.
because we know at this point of the Shuriman Empire, it is a great honor to become an Ascended. So I guess luckily for him, the other Ascended are like, dude, you're insane but powerful, so come join us.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a good thing right now, but we kind of covered in the Aatrox episode, it's not going to be a good thing forever.
Mhm.
And Varus does become one of the Ascended at this point. He is still someone that fights with his bow, but he kind of goes on just mad killing sprees from this point onward because he is just consumed with getting revenge against the Void and against the Acathians that set the Void into existence. So now he is just on a killing path, and it's even stated in his story that he likely didn't even notice that the Shirimans ultimately won the war with Acathia.
Yeah.
They ultimately defended the Shuriman Empire, and for Varus, it didn't matter. He just continued to go on killing sprees.
Yeah, so up until this point, our premium nutcase, as far as the Ascendant goes, was Renekton, but Renekton doesn't exist yet. So it turns out before there was a Jordan, there was a Magic Johnson. And that is who Varus was.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Magic Varus is going out and killing, but now we're getting to the point where the Shuriman Empire is starting to fall apart because the Ascended at this point, with the constant conflicts with the Void, their psyche is starting to deteriorate. We cover this in the Aatrox episode, and for Varus, this means nothing new to him because he's still going on killing sprees, except now he's just killing other Ascended as well as their followers. And this goes on until he this is like a very interesting point to the story to me, because I can't wait until we get more from this. But this goes on until he is ultimately imprisoned by a group that is led by a warrior queen, so a golden armored warrior queen of Valoran, as well as Vestian moonstalkers and human mages. And we haven't covered this yet as far as in the story, but as far as when we hear, as like League of Legends fans, when we hear golden clad warrior queen, I start thinking Kale.
Mhm.
But, you know, I we don't know that 100% for certain on the show. And I can't wait until we get more information and dive into it. But this is an interesting point of the story because Varus is ultimately imprisoned by this warrior queen. And the reason that I am kind of hesitant to say for sure that it's Gale is because the timeline doesn't match up, as
Yeah.
well as this warrior queen decides to wield the bow that has imprisoned Varus, ultimately sacrificing herself to ensure the victory for her people. And this war, as far as like the ultimate victory, means that they stretch out from the Shuriman Empire into the First Lands. The
Mhm.
First Lands being the land of Ionia. And it is in Ionia that she decides to have her subjects bury her alive along with the darkened weapon known as Varus. And now Varus is imprisoned forever. End of story. Right? Oh, wait, no. He's in prison for centuries and centuries, but everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. And the Fire Nation here is Noxus.
And it's funny because in our previous episode, we talked about how for a darkened weapon, this is their worst nightmare, right? Is being forgotten and being buried so deep you can't be found by the natural passage of time. And this case is so extreme to where not only do you have a magical being who's wielding you, you also are sealed in a magical tomb under the ground of a magical land. That is the worst case scenario for a darkened weapon.
Yeah. And I like it. I wonder if like at this point, if like Varus's psyche has deteriorated enough to where he is like worried about it as Aatrox was, because like I'm sure for Varus it's just like, no, kill, hate, murder, mutilate. So like I don't know like if he was as concerned about it as Aatrox, because I don't know if enough of his brain was left for him to be that concerned.
It's a great point, because that's the differentiating thing between the two is Aatrox was very much insecure at the point where he became a darkened weapon, where Varus is an empty shell of what he was. So there's nothing going on there. So he can't worry, he can't care because he has nothing left.
Yeah, he's given it all for the sake of revenge.
Yeah.
But unlike Aatrox's tale, where Aatrox is getting buried by the sands of Shurima, Varus is ultimately imprisoned, like we said, in the magical land of Ionia. And this is kind of where Ionia has an advantage, while also kind of being hoisted by their own petard, because they build a temple here. And the temple becomes the Temple of Pallas, as well as having a village that is built around it. So then there's now the lands of Pallas is where Varus is entombed. But the problem means that, he's not forgotten.
Yeah.
And that would have been better for all of the lands of Runeterra if a darkened weapon was just forgotten. But instead, we have the Noxus invasion coming in. And as we've covered in a lot of our Ionia episodes, go listen to that. For this tale, for the Village of Pallas, we get two beast hunters that are running from the Noxians while also trying to defend Pallas, and they are by the names of Valmar and his Heartlight Kai. So Valmar and Kai are now fighting the wave after wave of Noxian soldiers at the Temple of Pallas, and they are successful in defending Pallas, but Kai suffers a mortal wound, and a very grief-stricken Valmar decides to take Kai deeper into the temple in hopes of finding some kind of magical miracle. Because this is the first lands of Ionia. There is a chance that, the legends of what is buried in the temple have been changed and twisted by word of mouth, because this is hundreds upon hundreds of years later. But unfortunately for Kai and Valmar, that doesn't matter. They got too close. And we've discussed before, don't touch the living weapon. Just don't. Just don't do it. So within the temple, Varus is able to reach out from the bow to consume both Valmar and Kai. And it's unlike Aatrox, Varus is able to use these two souls, meld them together. Like, if there's any Full Metal Alchemist fans out there, you already know the joke I'm going to make here. Edward, and that's it. All right, we won't go deeper. It's still too soon. But that's what Varus does to Valmar and Kai.
You know what? That's a great example. And it is like Full Metal meets Diablo. I mean, this very timely. Diablo 4 just recently came out, which dates the episode. But the reason I bring that up is because it's not only unique in how other darkened weapons exist and are made, But because Varus is one of the more unique, crazed, sociopathic versions of the Darkin weapon, or most sociopathics.
Yeah.
Let me qualify
No, no.
that.
Yeah, most.
Yeah,
Most.
for him to end up in a situation where it's not him versus the consciousness of one person, it's him with two other souls creating a body and then essentially it like growing out of this amalgamation into a whole new form, which three people are sharing. And that's a very interesting take on this. And
Yes.
that's why I say it kind of feels like something you would see in Diablo as well.
Yeah, like it does definitely give like that kind of vibe to it, and it's definitely more in depth than Aatrox. Well, specifically Aatrox because Aatrox just absolutely annihilates whoever he
Hmm.
takes over, and his problem is that no one can survive it.
Yeah.
So he just goes from one host to the next.
Yeah.
Uh,
And Kane's a bit more
Kane
reserved, but
yeah,
he's still, yeah.
Kane is like Kane is 100% down to just go to war with a what is it, Rorschach, and so he's like, yeah, I got this,
Yeah.
and so they're just like duking it out 100%, and now Varus instead has got like two
Oh,
other
Roust, yeah.
Roust, thank you, so Kane's duking it out with Roust, pretty even fight
Yeah.
surprisingly, and but for Varus is like immediately taking control and then now just is like in kind of like Moon Knight position where
Yeah.
every now and
Actually,
then
yeah.
his form kind of goes in flux and
Yeah.
someone else is taking the wheel and
That's perfect. Yes.
yeah, so we get like a lot of different scenarios within the Darkin stories here, but as far as for the tale of Varus, it kind of like tapers off here
Mhm.
because now Varus has a working body, even though that body is constantly in flux and he's not always in control of it. Now that he has a body, it's like, no, I know what I want to do, which is kill, kill, hate, hate, murder, murder, mutilate.
Yeah.
So he's back on the killing spree, except now, every now and then, either Kai or Val is able to take over the wheel and do some steering for a little bit until Varus tells him to shut up and takes over again. And this inner monologue and this inner battle is just constantly going while Varus is trying to go about and turn Runeterra into a wasteland. And that's where his story ends for
Yeah.
right now.
And the neat thing with that is the story element or the story that we now can get from this interaction is, remember, he's an empty husk essentially when we start this situation. But because Val and Kai are there now, they're actually forcing him to redevelop a personality. So even though it's still a hateful, murder hungry personality, he now has like motive, right? He now has like, oh, well, I'm taking a side versus how they feel because we're now sharing the same body. They're forcing him to have essentially conversations back and forth, right? Within
Mhm.
himself, which is something he didn't do before because there was nothing happening inside. So it's essentially building back up to what we'll talk about more in stories
Yes.
with
And
his personality.
Val and Kai are able to kind of fill the void that Varus killed himself, which is
He said it.
because
He said the
like
keyword.
shut up. But they're able to kind of like reinvigorate the husk part of Varus because it is said that Val and his heart light Kai, which means that they're in a relationship.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're
they're
bringing
partners.
love to the table.
Yeah.
And, we have a whole series covering the Star Guardians about the power of friendship and love. Okay. So we're not going to go into it, but this is why Varus isn't, just outright winning.
Yeah.
But let's go to the card now because now we have Varus in the game of Runeterra, and we get a really interesting and fun card here. And so for starters, it is a 4 mana 3/4. It's a champion, so he has to have quick attack, and he does have the auto equip the Darkened Bow, and also an origin. So it is a Runeterra character. There's the origin of the Arrow of Retribution that allows him to play cultist or darkened cards from any region. And then once you have played 3+ cultist spells, you draw a Varus card. All right. And his level up condition is you have targeted 7+ allies. So, rejoice in Pantheon. Like we get that Pantheon support, baby, or auction support. Like,
Yeah.
Varus can squeeze into a lot of fun things, but he is always going to be the star of whatever decks he's in. And that's because of the flip side here. Well, combination of the flip side and the darkened bow. The flip side is that he's a 4/5 with quick attack and overwhelm.
Mhm.
Auto equip the darkened bow, and the darkened bow activates twice and has a max of +10/+0. Now, the activation, we got to talk about the darkened bow as a card.
Mhm.
It is an equipment, a 2-mana equipment with 0/0. When you play a spell or equip an ally, give me +1/+0 with a max of +5 until the next time my bearer strikes. So with Varus equipped, that turns him into a 14/5 with quick attack and overwhelm if you're set up. And if you're playing a Varus deck, you're going to be set up.
Yeah, and what this represents is if you've played League of Legends or if you haven't, Varus as a ADC has the ability to pull back his bow and hold a shot, and the longer you hold it, the more damage it does. So that's well translated to how they're using it in the game or in the card
Yeah,
game.
and shout out to the good old days where you could build a Muramasa and play Varus mid and just queue an ADC like one time and they die. Like shout out to the good old days, baby. But yeah, like this is a wonderful translation of how Varus is played in game translated to the card, and it's also really cool because like we also get like a kind of a different payoff compared to the other equipment decks, because this wants to be a little more spell slinky because you can play more of that constantly targeting yourself to just build up and swing out like a Voltron style, which we really had only seen in like the Pantheon deck.
Mhm.
So I loved that this card, like when it got added to Runeterra, it really gave like more flexibility to like a Voltron style instead
Yeah.
of just Pantheon or bust. But of course, we can't talk about these cards unless we get with the flavor.
Legally. We
Legally.
legally can't do that.
It's true. It's true. And like, God, as far as like I'm glad I brought up Moon Knight because we're gonna get some Moon Knight here. The front side. What if over time the man that became the Darkened remembered himself, prompted by the mortal voices within? What if instead of overcoming those voices entirely, he came to believe in them? All right. And then he flips over. Varus was empowered, bolstered, reminded of who he was and what he had yet to become. He embraced the sum of his parts instead of working against them. And when they acted as one. And if you look at like the card art combined with that quote, so the card art on the back, like, I mean, this is, he's going up against like some really like cultist like void creature things, and at this point it's like, what is Varus doing? Like in that picture, like if you kind of look around him too, compared to the people that he's aiming at, I'm pretty sure he's killing his own cultist followers.
Yeah, it's like picking and choosing. It's very similar if you listen to our Evelyn. And when we talk about Darkness, we're going to constantly reference Evelyn. But if you look at our Evelyn episode, we talked about the other lesser demons. It's kind of like a culling of the ranks to pretty much get them in order. If you like Demon Slayer, you're going to have your rank 1, 2, 3, upper levels, lower levels, all that, right? And that same thing applies to Darkens, where when they're corrupting, it doesn't mean everyone passes the test. Some people aren't going to make the cut.
Right. And unfortunately for people that follow Varus, if they don't make the cut, they get blasted into the next planet. But then we even have like some flavor text on the bow that kind of gives us, the other side, well, the other sides of the inside of Varus, which is the Heartlights, Kai and Valmar, were not the first to bear the bow and host Varus's inhuman power, but they were the first to remind him of his lost humanity. And we do know that as far as like to our knowledge, like the only wielder before this was the queen, the warrior queen that imprisoned Varus. But the queen wasn't able to combat Varus. She was able to just kind of hold on to herself to achieve her goals and then kill herself.
Yeah.
Like ultimately kill herself to stop Varus. Kai and Valmar are like, hey, remember what it's like to be human?
Yeah, it's a makeshift conscience with or conscience with duct tape. Yeah, it's held together with duct tape.
It's held together with duct tape and friendship. But yeah, that kind of wraps up the story for Varus. Like now he is just this split personality serial killer essentially. and I think that sums it up perfectly.
Yeah, and we'll wrap it up there for this episode because with Varus, we are going to obviously have a story episode, which is a fairly quick one, but Varus has a comic which expands on all of this, and we haven't done a comic in a while since I think like Nami, so we want to do one, and we're going to bring you that as well. As far as the release schedule, we'll figure that out.
You spoil our listeners so much.
Yeah,
like, you're not just gonna leave them hanging like, oh, when's the last time we did a comic? No, you're just gonna tell them right away. If it hasn't been clear yet, we're super excited. We're super excited.
Hex is trying to hold like a Darkin would hold those episodes hostage.
Yeah, you don't know this, but my mouse is actually a Darkin. I touch the living weapon.
And with that, as always, thanks for listening. We'll be back with the next episode.
Take care, everybody.